Forget everything school taught you about World War II. Forget the Hollywood movies, the polished documentaries, and the sanitized versions in your history textbooks. Because what you're about to discover are facts so bizarre, so disturbing, and so unexplainable that even the world's most brilliant scientists gave up trying to understand them. We're talking about weapons that dissolved living beings from the inside out. Ghost planes that appeared out of nowhere and vanished without a trace. Treasures that simply evaporated from the face of the earth. Premonitions that saved generals, and mysteries that, over 80 years later, still remain unsolved. Brace yourself, because after this video, you'll never look at World War II the same way again. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and hit that like button to help us keep bringing you more videos like this one. Operation Bernhard, the greatest counterfeiting scheme in history. The Nazis tried to destroy England without firing a single shot. What if I told you that the most skilled counterfeiters in history were Jewish prisoners in a concentration camp, forced to forge millions in British pounds just to save their own lives? Operation Bernhard was the largest counterfeiting scheme ever attempted in the history of economic warfare. The plan was simple, elegant, and terrifying. Flood Great Britain with so many counterfeit bills that the entire economy would collapse from hyperinflation. No invasion necessary, no army necessary, just paper, ink, and Jewish prisoners who had no choice but to cooperate. The operation began in 1939, right after the war started, under the codename Operation Andreas. The idea came from Arthur Nape, the head of Germany's criminal police. He proposed dropping 30 billion pounds in counterfeit bills over Great Britain, enough to render the currency worthless. The Bank of England notes at the time were elegant but simple, printed in black ink on white cotton paper, with a small image of Britannia in the corner. They looked easy to copy. They weren't. The first attempts failed miserably. The German counterfeiters couldn't crack the intricate security features hidden in those simple-looking notes. The paper felt wrong. The watermarks were off. The serial number algorithm remained a mystery. By 1942, the original team had given up. But then, Heinrich Himmler revived the project under a new name, Operation Bernhard, named after SS Major Bernhard Kruger, the textile engineer placed in charge. Kruger's approach was different. Instead of relying on ordinary counterfeiters, he would recruit the most skilled prisoners from Nazi concentration camps. Men with expertise in engraving, printing, graphic design, and banking operations. These men would work under the constant threat of death, but they would also receive unimaginable privileges inside the camps. Cigarettes, newspapers, extra rations, a ping-pong table, even musical performances. Here's the detail that makes this story almost unbearable. These Jewish prisoners knew exactly what was happening in the rest of the camp. They could hear the screams. They could smell the smoke from the crematoriums. They knew their survival depended on their usefulness to the Nazis. Every perfectly forged bill was one more day they stayed alive. Kruger set up his operation in blocks 18 and 19 at the Sachsenhausen concentration camp, about 20 miles north of Berlin. He personally interviewed potential workers, treating them with a politeness that shocked the prisoners. He knew that terrorized, brutalized workers wouldn't produce the quality he needed. By early 1943, the counterfeiting factory was running at full capacity. 12,000 sheets of special banknote paper arrived monthly from a secret factory. The prisoners had discovered that genuine British notes were printed on paper made from clean, recycled pure linen rags. They replicated it perfectly. They cracked the watermarks. They analyzed over 150 different security features hidden in the Bank of England's designs and reproduced every single one. The quality was so good that in 1942, when the first counterfeit notes entered circulation, the Bank of England couldn't believe it. They had always assumed their currency was impossible to forge. Now, here's the truly staggering part. Between 1943 and 1945, Operation Bernhard produced approximately 8 million counterfeit notes with a total face value of roughly 134 million pounds. In today's currency, that would be the equivalent of approximately $5 billion. These weren't crude counterfeits passed in dark alleys. These were notes so perfect they fooled banks across all of Europe. Some of the most famous espionage operations of the war were funded with Bernhard money. The daring rescue of Mussolini in 1943, 25,000 pounds in Operation Bernhard currency funded the bribes that made it possible. But here's the irony that makes this entire operation even more disturbing. After all that superhuman effort, after forcing Jewish prisoners to work under the constant shadow of death, after producing 8 million notes so perfect they fooled the finest bankers in Europe, Operation Bernhard never fulfilled its true mission. The original plan was devastating in its simplicity. Drop 30 billion pounds in counterfeit bills from the skies over Great Britain. Luftwaffe planes would fly over cities, towns, and countryside, unleashing a rain of paper that would destroy confidence in the British currency overnight. Every citizen who picked up a bill from the ground would unknowingly become an involuntary soldier in Hitler's economic war. The pound sterling would become worthless paper. Inflation would devour the economy the way fire devoured the bodies in the crematoriums, whose smoke the counterfeiters could smell every single night. It never happened. The Luftwaffe, which was already losing control of European skies, never managed to execute the mass drops. The war was consuming Germany from every direction. The resources that should have been used to flood England were diverted to fund espionage operations, bribe informants, and pay double agents in occupied territories. The perfect notes that should have destroyed an entire nation ended up being used as pocket change for covert operations. And when the final noose tightened in 1945, when Allied tanks were already roaring down the roads of Austria, the Nazis did the only thing they had left. They stacked millions of bills into wooden crates and dumped them into the freezing, dark waters of Lake Toplitz. The most sophisticated economic weapon ever created sank silently into the Alpine depths without ever having fired its final shot. The pound sterling never trembled. The British economy never collapsed. Winston Churchill never had to explain to the British people why their money was worthless. So what was left of Operation Bernhard? A technically brilliant operation that failed strategically. A monument to Nazi arrogance for believing they could destroy an empire with ink and paper while their own empire crumbled around them. And 142 Jewish prisoners who survived hell not because they were set free, but because their hands were too useful to be burned. Nazis and Allies fighting together. The Battle of Castle Itter. Imagine May 5th, 1945. Germany is in total collapse. Hitler has been dead for 5 days. The formal surrender is a matter of hours away. And in a medieval castle in the Austrian Alps, something that should not be possible is about to happen. American soldiers and German Wehrmacht soldiers carrying weapons on the same side of a barricade. Let me take you to Castle Itter in the Austrian Tyrol. For 3 years, that place had functioned as a high-value prison for special prisoners of the Reich. Not Jews, not partisans, VIPs, personalities that the Nazis wanted to control but could not simply kill. Among the captives were Maxime Weygand, the general who had commanded French forces during the fall of France, Edouard Daladier, the former prime minister who had signed the Munich agreements, among several others. As the Reich implodes, the castle's commander, an SS major named Sebastian Wimberger, makes a surprising choice. He refuses to execute the prisoners and decides to try to hand them over to the Allies alive. He sends a messenger on a bicycle to the nearest town, Worgel, to find American troops. Who he finds is Captain John Lee, commander of a small group from the American 12th Armored Regiment. Lee hears the situation and makes a quick calculation. They were few, they were in hostile territory, and the roads were full of SS units still fighting. But those people inside the castle were going to die if he did not act. Lee accepts, and then he does something no military manual had ever anticipated. He recruits German soldiers to help with the mission. Not just any Germans. It is Major Joseph Gangl, a Wehrmacht officer who had secretly joined the Austrian resistance. Gangl hated the Nazi regime. He and his men wanted the war to end before more people died. He had contacts with local guerrillas and knew the terrain. In the early hours of May 5th, an impossible group sets out toward the castle. Americans from the 12th Armored, Wehrmacht soldiers led by Gangl, local Austrian guerrillas, and even some of the prisoners themselves who knew how to shoot and decided to fight for their own survival. Weygand, who had once commanded an entire army, was now carrying a second-hand rifle behind an improvised barricade. The enemy? A unit from the 17th SS Panzer Grenadier Division that did not recognize the surrender and had orders not to let the prisoners fall into enemy hands alive. The firefight begins at dawn, the SS attack from the eastern side of the castle. The small mixed force holds its ground. Lee coordinates the defense. Gangl moves between positions, passing ammunition and organizing the shooters. And then, at the worst possible moment, Gangl is left exposed while trying to protect former Prime Minister Reynaud. An SS shooter hits him with a burst of fire. Joseph Gangl, the German officer who switched sides to save lives, dies in the courtyard of the Austrian castle. The defense holds for hours until an American Sherman tank arrives as reinforcement. The SS retreat. The castle is liberated. All prisoners survive. It is the only documented battle in history in which American and German forces fought as allies, an alliance that lasted less than 24 hours, in a world where everything that seemed impossible had already happened. John Lee received the Distinguished Service Cross. The name of Joseph Gangl is engraved on Austrian monuments as a war hero. The prisoners of Castle Itter went home. The war would officially end 2 days later. The Dark Death of General Patton. Accident or assassination? One of the most famous generals in United States history who survived the horrors of World War II, including invading Nazi Germany, but died under mysterious circumstances in a crash on an empty road, and worse, the people responsible were never brought to trial. For 80 years, people have been asking the same question. Was it really an accident? Let me paint the picture for you. It's December 9th, 1945, 4 months after Germany's surrender. The war is over. Patton, the most feared American general in the European theater, is in occupied Germany serving as military governor of Bavaria. He's miserable. The man who had led the Third Army across France, who had rescued the besieged troops at Bastogne during the Battle of the Bulge, who had pushed deeper into Nazi Germany than any other Allied commander, was now pushing paper behind a desk. That morning Patton had been invited by his chief of staff, Major General Hobart Gay, to hunt pheasants near the city of Speyer. They were driving on a road near Mannheim, chatting casually. Patton notices burned-out car wrecks on the roadside and mutters, "How horrible war is. Think of the waste." Moments later, an army truck driven by Sergeant Robert Thompson makes a left turn directly in front of them. Here's where things get strange. The collision wasn't particularly violent. Gay and the driver walked away with minor injuries. But Patton, who was looking out the side window and didn't brace for impact, was thrown forward. His head struck the steel frame of the glass partition separating the front and back seats, then snapped back. His neck broke. Third and fourth cervical vertebrae. Compression fracture with displacement. He was paralyzed from the neck down. What a horrible way to die, Patton told Gay as they waited for the ambulance. He knew immediately what had happened to his body. He couldn't feel a thing. But here's the part that still haunts researchers to this day. The official accident report disappeared. The truck driver Thompson and his 2 passengers vanished after giving brief statements. No criminal charges were filed, no court-martial, no accountability of any kind. The only person seriously injured in an accident involving one of the most famous generals in American history, and the paperwork just vanishes. Patton was taken to the 130th Station Hospital in Heidelberg. The best doctors from Germany, England, and the United States were summoned. For 12 days, the general fought. His mood swung between profanity-laced rage and dark humor. "If there's any doubt in your minds that I'm going to be paralyzed for the rest of my life," he told the medical staff, "well, let's cut this whole thing short right now and let me die." Minutes later, he was joking with the nurses and asking for whiskey. On the afternoon of December 21st, 1945, the shortest and darkest day of the year, George Patton died in his sleep. A blood clot had formed in his paralyzed body and traveled to his heart. He was 60 years old. Now, here's the detail that changes everything. In 1979, a former OSS agent named Douglas Pizzata made a bombshell confession at an intelligence veterans gathering in Washington. He claimed that William Wild Bill Donovan, the head of the Office of Strategic Services, America's wartime spy agency, had ordered him to assassinate Patton. Pizzata said he was paid $10,000 for the job. He claimed that he and an accomplice followed Patton's car that day and used a specially designed weapon to fire a projectile into the vehicle, breaking Patton's neck in a way that would look like an accident. When the crash didn't kill him, Pizzata claimed a Soviet agent snuck into the hospital and administered a slow-acting poison. Is it true? Historians remain deeply divided. What we know for certain is this: Patton was one of the most vocal critics of the Soviet Union at a time when they were still America's allies. He openly called for the Allies to rearm the defeated Germans and march on Moscow. He was a political time bomb. The man who called himself Old Blood and Guts died in a hospital bed in Germany on the winter solstice. His grave at the Luxembourg American Cemetery faces the thousands of Third Army soldiers who fell during the Battle of the Bulge. His cross stands at the front of the rows, as if he were still leading them in one final battle. 8 decades later, we still don't have a definitive answer. The biggest lie of World War II, the fake army that changed history. They became known as the Ghost Army, and they operated just 1,300 feet from Nazi enemy lines. They fought against thousands of soldiers and tanks, while they did not even have heavy weapons to fight back. A single tank that advanced could have wiped out all 1,100 people responsible for the missions. And even knowing all the risk they were exposed to, they carried out approximately 25 missions, even making Hitler believe that the D-Day attack would come at Pas-de-Calais instead of Normandy. The Ghost Army was the nickname given to the 23rd Headquarters Special Troops, a unit so secret that its existence was not declassified until 1996, more than 50 years after the end of the war. These 1,100 men were responsible for some of the most audacious deception operations in military history, and they did it armed with nothing heavier than .50 caliber machine guns, sound effects records, and rubber. Even before setting foot in France, the Ghost Army already had a crucial role. They participated in Operation Fortitude, the greatest military deception of all time. The objective was to convince Hitler that the Allied invasion would come at Pas-de-Calais, just 20 miles from the English coast, and not in Normandy, 150 miles to the south. To do this, the Allies created an entire army that did not exist. FUSAG, the first U.S. Army group. Inflatable rubber tanks, painted wooden buildings, fake airplanes, and fictitious radio transmissions. And in command of this Ghost Army, General George Patton, the only Allied commander the Germans truly feared. Hitler's generals believed that wherever Patton was, that was where the main attack would come. So they waited for him at Pas-de-Calais. They positioned their best panzer divisions there, they built their strongest defenses there, and on June 6, 1944, while the Germans were still looking north waiting for Patton, 156,000 Allied soldiers landed in Normandy. The deception was so perfect that even after D-Day, Hitler kept his reserves at Pas-de-Calais for weeks, convinced that Normandy was just a distraction, and that Patton's real attack was still to come. When Allied commanders needed to divert German attention from a real attack, or make the enemy believe that a massive force was stationed in one place while the real troops moved to another, they called the Ghost Army. In a matter of hours, these men could create the illusion of an entire armored division, tanks, trucks, artillery pieces, and inflatable aircraft that looked completely real from the air or from a distant observation post. The visual deception unit, the 603rd Camouflage Engineers, was full of artists. Real artists, many of them recruited directly from art schools in New York and Philadelphia. Bill Blass, who would later become one of the most famous fashion designers in America, was assigned to this unit. So was Ellsworth Kelly, who would become one of the leading abstract painters of the 20th century. Arthur Singer, who would gain fame as a wildlife illustrator, drew his way through Europe between operations. These men took their artistic skills and applied them to war. They did not simply inflate rubber tanks and leave them sitting in a field. They studied how real armored units behaved. They noticed that tank treads left marks in the mud, so they dragged heavy objects behind jeeps to simulate those marks. They realized that soldiers hung laundry on clotheslines, so they set up fake clotheslines. They observed that military camps had a certain messy, lived-in quality, so they deliberately arranged their props to look imperfect. The goal was never to create a perfect illusion, but one convincing enough to fool German reconnaissance pilots and scouts. But visual deception was only part of the operation. The 31st 102nd Signal Service Company handled the sonic deception. Working with engineers from Bell Labs, they had traveled to Fort Knox before deployment and recorded every sound an armored unit could make. Engines starting, treads clanking, soldiers shouting orders, equipment being moved. These recordings were loaded onto special wire recorders and played through massive speakers mounted on half-tracks. The sound could be heard from more than 12 miles away. German listening posts picked up the unmistakable noise of a tank division approaching and reported it up the chain of command, never knowing that the tanks were speakers on wheels. The third component was radio deception. The 244th Signal Company was made up of operators who had learned to mimic the distinctive fist of real radio operators. Every person who transmits Morse code develops their own rhythm, their own style, like a signature. The Ghost Army operators studied real units, learned their communication patterns, and then impersonated them on the radio. German intelligence intercepted these transmissions and believed they were tracking the movements of real combat divisions. Perhaps their most dangerous mission came in March of 1945, during the crossing of the Rhine River. This was one of the last great obstacles between Allied forces in the heart of Germany. General Omar Bradley needed to hide the location of the real crossing, while convincing the Germans that the main attack would come from somewhere else. The Ghost Army set up an elaborate deception near the town of Viersen, creating the illusion of two complete divisions preparing to cross the river. They inflated hundreds of rubber vehicles, played continuous sound effects of construction and troop movement, and flooded the radio frequencies with fake traffic. German defenders shifted their forces to face this apparent threat, leaving the real crossing point weakly defended. Here's the part that still gives veterans chills. The Ghost Army operated less than 1,300 feet from German positions. They were within rifle range of enemy troops, armed with nothing but rubber props and speakers. If the Germans had realized what was happening, if they had launched a counterattack, the 1,100 men of the 23rd would have been massacred. They knew this. They went anyway. Only 3 members of the Ghost Army were killed in combat during the entire war. Their deceptions saved an estimated 15,000 to 30,000 American lives by diverting German forces away from real attacks. When the war ended, the soldiers of the Ghost Army were sworn to secrecy. They could not tell their families what they had done. For decades, these men stayed silent, and many of them died without ever receiving public recognition. It was only in 1996 that the records were finally declassified. And in February of 2022, 77 years after the end of the war, they finally received the Congressional Gold Medal. Who betrayed Anne Frank? The 80-year-old mystery that remains unsolved. The most famous diary in the world has a missing page, the traitor's name. Think about that for a moment. For 2 years and 35 days, 8 people lived in a hidden space smaller than most one-bedroom apartments. They couldn't speak above a whisper during business hours. They couldn't open curtains. They couldn't flush the toilet when workers were in the building below. They couldn't go outside, not even once. And then, on a single August morning, someone picked up a phone and ended it all. Anne Frank's story is known by millions. But what most people don't know is that the identity of the person who betrayed her family remains one of the most haunting mysteries of the entire war. Let me take you back to Amsterdam, 1942. The Frank family had fled Germany after Hitler's rise and settled in the Netherlands, hoping they'd be safe. They weren't. When the Nazis occupied the country, Jews were forced to register, wear yellow stars, and eventually report for forced labor in the East. Everyone knew what that really meant. On July 6, 1942, the Franks went into hiding. Otto Frank, Anne's father, had prepared a secret annex behind his business at Prinsengracht 263, a canal-side building in the heart of Amsterdam. The entrance was hidden behind a movable bookcase. For the next 2 years, Otto, his wife Edith, their daughters Margot and Anne, along with the Van Pels family and a dentist named Fritz Pfeffer, would live in that cramped space. Anne, who turned 13 shortly before going into hiding, kept a diary. She wrote about her fears, her dreams, her crush on Peter Van Pels, her conflicts with her mother, her hopes of becoming a writer after the war. She had no idea her words would one day be read by more than 30 million people in 70 languages. On August 4th, 1944, at approximately 10:30 in the morning, the nightmare arrived. An SS officer named Karl Silberbauer led a team of Dutch Nazi collaborators up the stairs, past the bookcase into the annex. Someone had given the Franks up. Someone had made a call to the Gestapo. Anne and her sister Margot were later transferred to the Bergen-Belsen concentration camp. They died there in February or March of 1945, just weeks before British forces liberated the camp. Typhus, combined with starvation and exhaustion, killed them both. Anne was 15 years old. Of the 8 people who hid in the annex, only Otto Frank survived the war. So who made that call? For 8 decades, investigators, historians, and amateur detectives have chased this question. More than 30 suspects have been examined. In 2022, a cold case team led by retired FBI agent Vincent Pankoke announced they had solved the mystery. Their 5-year investigation, which used artificial intelligence and criminal profiling, pointed to a man named Arnold van den Berg, a prominent Jewish notary who had served on Amsterdam's Jewish Council during the war. The team claimed van den Berg, desperate to protect his own family from deportation, had given the Nazis a list of addresses where Jews were hiding, including Prinsengracht 263. But here's where the story takes another turn. Weeks after the book was published, Dutch historians dismantled the theory. They pointed out the team had made fundamental errors about how the Jewish Council operated. There was no evidence such lists of hiding places ever existed. Van den Berg had actually gone into hiding himself in February 1944, 6 months before the Frank family was discovered. The Dutch publisher of the book issued a formal apology and pulled it from stores. So where does that leave us? Exactly where we started. Someone picked up a phone on August 4th, 1944. Someone spoke the words that sent 8 people to their deaths. That person's identity remains unknown. Every theory has crumbled under scrutiny. Every lead has gone cold. What we're left with is a 15-year-old girl who dreamed of becoming a famous writer, who believed, despite everything, that people were still good at heart. And we're left with a question that may never be answered. Who betrayed Anne Frank? The Foo Fighters. Ghost lights in the skies of war. Picture this. You're an Allied pilot flying at over 250 miles per hour over enemy territory in Germany. It's December 1944, the night is pitch black, and the cold is freezing even the metal of your cockpit. Suddenly, a bright glowing sphere appears right next to your plane. It follows you. If you speed up, it speeds up. If you dive, it dives with you, but it never attacks. Pilots from the 415th Night Fighter Squadron reported these lights hundreds of times. They nicknamed them Foo Fighters. The spheres varied in color, from orange to green, from white to red. They didn't show up on radar, they made no sound, and no weapon could hit them. The CIA investigated the case in 1953 and concluded absolutely nothing. The St. Elmo's fire theory doesn't explain the object's intelligent movement. The mass hallucination theory doesn't hold up either, because pilots on both sides, Allied and Axis, saw the exact same thing. To this day, no one knows what those lights were. The skies of war had spectators that nobody invited, and they never introduced themselves. The Impossible Flight of Rudolf Hess, May 10th, 1941. Rudolf Hess, the third most powerful man in Nazi Germany, Hitler's right-hand man, had dinner at his home in Augsburg. After dinner, he climbed into a Messerschmitt Bf-110 and flew alone without escort for nearly 1 Euro miles to Scotland. He landed by crashing the plane in a field, bailed out by parachute, and was found by a farmer. He asked to speak with the Duke of Hamilton, claiming he had come on a peace mission. Hitler was furious. Churchill was confused. Stalin was suspicious. Hess was arrested and spent the rest of his life behind bars, 46 years in total, the last 20 as the sole prisoner of Spandau prison in Berlin. When he died in 1987, they demolished the entire prison to prevent it from becoming a neo-Nazi shrine. The man who was Hitler's shadow flew straight to the enemy for reasons that no one can fully explain to this day. The Battle of Los Angeles. The night America shot at nothing. February 25th, 1942, 3 months after Pearl Harbor. Nerves along the American West Coast were on edge. Just the day before, a Japanese submarine had shelled oil installations near Santa Barbara. Then, in the early hours of the following morning, something appeared in the skies over Los Angeles. Anti-aircraft searchlights swept the sky. Over 400 rounds were fired. Air raid sirens woke millions of people. The chaos lasted for hours. But here's the detail that changes everything. There was no enemy aircraft. The Navy declared it a false alarm. But dozens of witnesses swore they saw solid objects in the sky, objects that the shells passed right through without causing any damage. 2 people died of heart attacks during the panic. 3 more were killed by shrapnel from America's own shells. The United States spent over 400 rounds shooting at something that officially never existed. Die Glocke, the Nazi death bell. In the year 2000, Polish journalist Igor Witkowski revealed to the world one of the most disturbing stories of the war. According to classified Soviet documents he claimed to have accessed, the Nazis developed a secret weapon called Die Glocke, or the bell. It stood roughly 11 feet tall, was shaped like a bell, and contained 2 cylinders that spun in opposite directions, filled with a mysterious metallic liquid called Zerum 525. When activated, the device emitted a terrifying bluish glow. But the worst part was its effect. Plants within a 650-foot radius decomposed in minutes. The blood of animals clotted instantly inside their bodies. Scientists who worked on the project died under horrific conditions. No prototype was ever found. The scientists involved vanished. The documents, if they ever existed, disappeared. A device that killed everything around it simply ceased to exist, along with everyone who knew anything about it. The Amber Room, the 8th wonder that vanished. In 1716, Prussian King Frederick William I gifted Tsar Peter the Great an entire chamber made of amber panels, gold leaf, and precious stones. Over the centuries, the room was expanded to over 590 square feet, containing more than 13,000 pounds of amber. It was called the 8th Wonder of the World. When the Nazis invaded the Soviet Union in 1941, Russian curators tried to hide the room behind wallpaper. It didn't work. German soldiers dismantled everything in just 36 hours and shipped the panels to Königsberg, now known as Kaliningrad. And then the Amber Room disappeared. Forever. Some say it was destroyed in the bombings of 1944. Others believe it's hidden in some underground bunker. There were those who swore they saw it being loaded onto a ship that sank in the Baltic Sea. 13,000 pounds of amber, gold, and precious stones simply vanished, and no one has ever found a single fragment.